Humans have built a lot of terrible prisons. Some used sharks, some used silence. One got a sarcastic nickname from its own prisoners, and the nickname became world famous. These are the 8 worst prisons ever built, counting down to number 1, which, by the way, is still open today. Number 8. The Tower of London. Imagine walking into a castle, beautiful stone walls, royal guards, a place fit for kings. Now imagine finding out you're never leaving. For centuries, the Tower of London wasn't just a royal fortress. It was where England locked away its most important prisoners, princes, queens, nobles, even famous explorers. Some waited months for a trial, others never got one. Anne Boleyn walked in as a queen. She never walked out. The walls weren't terrifying because they looked scary. They were terrifying because of what happened inside them. Interrogations, executions, disappearances. If those stones could talk, they'd probably ask for a therapist. The most famous mystery involves 2 young princes who vanished inside the tower in the late 1400s. Nobody knows exactly what happened to them, but nearly 200 years later, workers found 2 small skeletons buried under a staircase. Today, the tower holds the crown jewels and a gift shop, which is a strange retirement for a building like this, but at least the tower kept its prisoners on dry land. The next prison used the ocean as a wall. Number 7. Alcatraz. On New Year's Eve, prisoners at Alcatraz could hear something drifting across the water. Music, laughter, parties in San Francisco. Freedom was close enough to hear and completely impossible to reach. Alcatraz sits on a small rocky island in San Francisco Bay, barely 2 kilometers from shore. On paper, that swim doesn't sound impossible. Then you jump in. The water is around 10 degrees Celsius, cold enough to make your muscles stop working. The currents constantly drag swimmers away from land, and if the cold doesn't get you, exhaustion probably will. Funny enough, the food at Alcatraz was famously good. When your best selling point is great meatloaf, impossible escape, you're a prison with a marketing problem. Officially, nobody ever escaped and survived. The most famous attempt came in 1962 when 3 inmates crawled through ventilation holes they'd secretly widened with homemade tools. They left dummy heads in their beds, made from soap, toilet paper, and real human hair. Imagine donating your own hair to a fake version of yourself. The men vanished into the night. No bodies were ever found. More than 60 years later, people are still arguing about whether they made it. But at least Alcatraz gave you a trial first. The next prison didn't bother. Number 6. Chateau d'If. You didn't have to commit a crime to end up in Chateau d'If. You just needed the wrong enemy. Built on a small rocky island off the coast of Marseille, this French fortress became famous for holding political prisoners, religious enemies, and anyone the government found inconvenient. The prison itself wasn't impossible to escape. The sea was. Rough water, sharp cliffs, strong currents. Even if you reached the shoreline, you still had to swim for your life. Most prisoners never got that chance. Some spent decades locked in tiny stone cells with almost no human contact. And here's the part that really stings. Rich prisoners could pay for better cells, a window, a fireplace. Even in prison, there was a first class. The place became so infamous it inspired the Count of Monte Cristo. Turns out, being framed and thrown into an island prison makes for a pretty good revenge story. Chateau d'If held people for decades. The next prison only needed 1 night. Number 5. The Black Hole of Calcutta. June 1756. 1 room, roughly 5 meters by 4. According to one survivor, 146 people were forced inside. By morning, only 23 walked out. After the capture of Fort William in Calcutta, British prisoners were locked overnight in a tiny guard room. Historians still argue about the exact numbers, but nearly every account agrees on one thing. The conditions were horrific. As the hours passed, the room became unbearably hot. People fought for space near the 2 small windows. Many collapsed where they stood because there wasn't enough room to fall down. Whether the details grew in the telling or not, the story became one of history's most infamous lessons in overcrowding. Sometimes a prison doesn't need torture. It just needs walls that are too close together. The next prison had a nickname. The prisoners who invented it were being sarcastic. Number 4. Hoa Lo Prison. Imagine hearing the words, "You'll be home soon," except nobody can tell you when soon is. Built by the French in the late 1800s, Hoa Lo Prison in Vietnam has a name that roughly translates to fiery furnace. They weren't exaggerating. Cells were overcrowded. Prisoners were shackled together. Disease spread easily. Food was scarce. Then, during the Vietnam War, American prisoners of war were held there. They gave the place a nickname, the Hanoi Hilton. It was not a compliment. Future Senator John McCain spent 5.5 years inside. Prisoners later described harsh interrogations, isolation, and psychological pressure that lasted for years. Some counted the days. Others stopped counting altogether. Because the hardest part of prison isn't knowing how long you'll stay. It's having absolutely no idea. But at least Hoa Lo sat in the middle of a city. The next prison was built where no one could find you, and the jungle finished whatever the guards started. Number 3. Devil's Island. Imagine being told you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Not behind bars, not surrounded by guards, but on a tiny island where the jungle wants you dead just as much as the prison does. Welcome to Devil's Island. Off the coast of French Guiana, this penal colony became one of the most feared places on Earth. The name alone sounds like someone gave up on subtlety. Around 80,000 prisoners were shipped there over the years. Most never came home. The French even had a nickname for the whole system, the dry guillotine, because it killed you slowly without ever needing a blade. Escape? Good luck. Even past the guards, you'd face shark-filled waters, brutal currents, venomous snakes, tropical disease, and endless rainforest. Some prisoners actually escaped the prison, only to die trying to escape the island. Others built rafts from scraps of wood and floated into the Atlantic, hoping for a miracle. Most never made it. When a prison has a better survival rate inside than outside, it belongs on this list. Devil's Island destroyed the body. The next prison was designed to destroy something else. Number 2. Robben Island. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. 18 of them were here. Robben Island, off the coast of South Africa, became the most famous political prison in the world. Prisoners spent long days breaking rocks in a limestone quarry. The glare off the white stone was so harsh it permanently damaged Mandela's eyes. Letters from family were heavily restricted. Visits were rare. Even talking to other prisoners could bring punishment, because the goal wasn't just to lock people away, it was to break their spirit. Instead, the prisoners secretly educated one another. They shared books, taught languages, debated politics. Mandela even wrote his autobiography in secret and buried the pages in the prison garden. The inmates called the place the university. It's one of the few prisons in history where knowledge became a form of rebellion. The prisoners of Robben Island survived by sticking together, which is exactly why the worst prison ever built makes sure you never see another human being at all. Number 1. ADX Florence. There's a prison in Colorado that nobody has ever escaped from, but that's not why it's number 1. ADX Florence, nicknamed the Supermax, is often called the most secure prison on Earth. It has held men like El Chapo and the Unabomber. Many inmates spend around 23 hours a day alone in their cells. Meals come through a slot in the door. Exercise happens alone in a small concrete yard. For some prisoners, days blur into weeks, weeks blur into months, and months become years. One former warden described it as a clean version of hell. Supporters say these measures are needed to contain the world's most dangerous criminals. Critics say extreme isolation slowly takes apart the human mind. Either way, very few places on Earth feel more cut off from the outside world. And unlike everything else on this list, it's still open right now. So maybe the lesson from history's worst prisons isn't just about walls, or bars, or guards. The worst prisons took away something more important: hope. Some trapped people behind oceans, some behind politics, some behind fear, and some behind 4 concrete walls where almost nobody else existed. Because in the end, the strongest prison has never been the one that's hardest to escape. It's the one that makes people believe they never will.